Hello and welcome everybody to New Earth Consciousness. Tanya here with Emma Bragdon. She is the founder of Integrative Mental Health University, author of 7 books, and she trains spiritual emergence coaches. And so Emma, thank you so much for being here. Excited to have you here on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Tanya. Thank you so much for your invitation.
Yeah. So this conversation is going to be all about spiritual awakening, which I feel like it's become, I guess, with more, more part of mainstream awareness, where before it wasn't really a thing. So this, we're going to dive into this theme about spiritual awakening. So, but before we do that, maybe just share with us a little bit about what drew you to want to do this work. What's your background? Where are you coming from?
Okay. So I'll go into my own personal history a little bit. And it starts in terms of it being relevant to spiritual awakening. It starts when early on, before I was 10, I had 2 near-death experiences. And that opened me up to a dimension or world which was just made of pure love and compassion and wisdom. And it's not like I saw a face or someone that I would relate to and have a picture of, but it was a place that was just permeated with the vibration of love. And so from a very early age, I didn't have words for any of it, but I thought, I want to go in that direction, but I don't want to die to get there. How do I do this? So none of that was I was able to put into words. But when I discovered meditation when I was 18, I thought, aha, here's the pathway. I got it. Because I was ecstatic first time I tried meditation, because it led me into that zone. So by the time I was 20, I was involved as a nun, we would call it, at a Zen Buddhist center, and doing very intense meditation. And that took me 4 years into a time where my teacher unfortunately passed away. And then I entered into a zone where I was getting a tremendous amount from shamanism. So I had the good fortune of being able to work with a shaman from the Yurok tribe, a male, and then a female from the Lakota tribe. And over a period of about 20 years, I learned a tremendous amount from this indigenous wisdom. I went on, after getting a PhD in transpersonal psychology, I went on to teach starting in the 1990s. And that took me to Brazil because I was invited to teach there. And that took me into looking more deeply into spiritual healing that's offered in Brazil. And as a result, in 2008, I founded the Foundation for Energy Therapies, because so much of what was clear to me about the success of spiritual healing in Brazil was coming from working with the energy body, or working with the subtle energies of the body. Mm-hmm. And it's not that changing something in the subtle energy would always change something in the physical energy, but I saw healings where people who had been given up for dead were basically brought back to full life without a brain tumor which was cancerous in the middle of their brain. So there was astounding healing that I also documented in film. It has been documented by others as well, so I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. But the healing that was going on a physical level and psychological level was impressive to me. Mm-hmm. And I was able to visit later, well, in those years, 11 years, where I spent 6 months out of every year in Brazil, I was also able to visit Spiritist psychiatric hospitals and Spiritist community centers. And I'm not misspeaking. I'm not saying spiritualist. I'm saying Spiritist.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. What does that mean exactly?
Well, let me just finish the sentence and I will go back. Yeah. But within these particular centers and hospitals, they were able to create a system which would inspire and support spiritual awakening. And for those people who are really distressed in their process of spiritual awakening, they could go into a Spiritist center or a Spiritist psychiatric hospital and get appropriate help, which means they were not considered psychotic. They were often considered highly sensitive people who needed to harness their God-given gifts. So I'm known as a pioneer and as someone who's an expert in spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis or spiritual emergency. So I did everything I could to bring what I had learned in Brazil and what I've learned also for the indigenous cultures and Zen Buddhism into the purview of the United States to help improve our mental health care system. So I'll go back to your question. What's Spiritism?
Yeah.
Spiritism was started by an academic in Paris, France, back in the 1860s. And he interviewed many mediums during that time when seances were becoming very fashionable. But he interviewed many people who were channeling the wisdom of highly evolved spirits. And because he was an academic, he systematized and collated and came up with 5 books that are foundation of what he calls Spiritism. And Spiritism is oriented, as I said, towards spiritual evolution, supporting spiritual growth. Whereas spiritualism at that time in the 1850s was really oriented towards, wow, let's explore these phenomena. Wow, look at this, table tipping. Wow, look at this, musical instruments playing by themselves. Wow, look at this, we can talk to people who are dead. So getting into the phenomena is very different than a serious approach to spiritual awakening and spiritual growth. And that's the difference between spiritualism and spiritism.
Interesting. So how do you define a spiritual awakening versus someone who is going through mental health crisis? What's the difference between the two? Sometimes they can be similar, can't they? Yeah.
In fact, in the work that I do, training spiritual emergence coaches, I make very clear, not a binary situation, not emergence or spiritual awakening or pathology. So for instance, if I'll just bring up a story I heard from a client. She said when she was 6 years old, she was playing with her 4-year-old brother in a bedroom by themselves. And her brother entered into a situation where there was a belt around his neck and he was literally strangling. And she didn't know what to do. She just screamed and was traumatized by the whole situation and her own helplessness. And in response to her scream, a parent came and rectified the situation. So that's the good news. And the other piece of good news is that in the midst of the acute trauma she was having, she saw Jesus Christ standing in the room.
Oh, wow.
And basically giving her the message that all was okay, she was okay, and just providing a tremendous loving vibration in that situation. And she said that experience was so well defined for her at the time that it has stuck with her for her whole life. And she feels the presence of Jesus Christ frequently in her life as a sense of, even though there's difficulty going on, the Christ presence is not far away. So I would say a spiritual awakening experience, just a pure spiritual awakening experience, is generally comes from our sixth sense or our third eye or our intuition. But it can take us into having like a visionary experience, as she did, and that provided a tremendous amount of comfort and wisdom. And it can happen also that if someone has that kind of experience, that it can happen at the same time as a trauma, or that having the big opening which is positive, can also interact in our psyche in a way that pulls up trauma that we've had in the past that we've not fully digested.
Mm-hmm.
So people who are in a spiritual awakening process can have ecstatic experiences, as I did when I tried meditation the first time. But it can also bring up trauma, or which may be confusion, or it may be upset, or it may be depression, or whatever that's left over from things we haven't fully integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a spiritual emergence process, which can be lifelong, we
Right.
can go through periods of time where there's a great spiritual awakening experience, like feeling the presence of Christ, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And it may catalyze or an experience where we're also more in touch with things that we've stashed away in the back of the closet because we didn't want to deal with it. So therefore, someone in a spiritual emergence process may present with both things going on simultaneously. Oh, I've had this great experience. I saw Christ.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I'm having these wicked dreams and feeling upset in the morning, and I can't really sleep because I'm seeing something that tells me that I was abused as a child. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out what's real.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't call that pathology necessarily, but I might say, oh, that person is having a lot of depression, maybe some anxiety. They aren't able to sleep. They're processing a lot, and they would need some psychological support. I would prefer not to use the word pathology for it.
Mm-hmm.
Simultaneously, this person may be, in fact, trying to wrap their mind around the fact that they're having not only one, but more spiritual experiences, and they're having a tremendous desire to open up more on a spiritual level and understand what's going on with them. So I don't mean to be long-winded. That
No,
answer
you're
your
not being
question?
long-winded. No, it's very good because it's true that, I mean, I don't know. Would you say that most people have trauma? Like, I don't know of very many people who've never had trauma in their life. Maybe one or two, who've had good lives, healthy childhoods and healthy parents and all of that. But it seems to me that the majority of people have trauma and have unprocessed trauma. And there seems to be, do you have a theory or an explanation for what I'm seeing as more and more people having these awakening experiences? And I don't know if that's just because we now have the internet, and so people are finding each other, they're having a place to share, and maybe people have had awakening experiences to this level of degree, or, is it a new thing? Like, and some people will say, well, that this time in particular is about the Great Awakening, and it's because of, the shifts on the planet and consciousness and the astrology and all the things, that say, oh, well, this is why we're seeing this. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I'm a follower of the Self-Realization Fellowship. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as a result is that the person who gave guidance to Paramahansa Yogananda was very much into what he called the yugas, which are basically timelines that last about 24,000 years. And within that particular timeline, we are moving from a period of time called the Kali Yuga into a period of time which is called Dwapara Yuga. And this comes from over 1,000 years of wisdom coming from sages in India. So in the Kali Yuga age, people don't see anything about spirituality. And they basically say, if you can't use your 5 senses your ability to touch, to smell, to taste, etc. If you can't use your five senses to see and to measure what's in front of you, then it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the Kali Yuga. And a lot of us were brought up in schools that were basically oriented in that Kali Yuga way.
Mm-hmm.
That is the way to be scientific, is to see that you can measure it with your five senses. And the Dwapara age, which actually we are about 200 years into at this particular point, says, no, energy is far more primary than material reality. Well, energy is something we're learning how to measure to some degree, but we can't see it, taste it, hear it for the most part. And certainly the subtle energies, which we can say are connected to the aura or the chakras and the human body, it's very difficult to measure those with any of the measurement devices that we have. So in the Dwapara age, which we are, again, transitioning into, people will be spontaneously opening up to seeing that energy is more primary than matter, and that they can actually open up the third eye or the sixth sense to be able to experience how energy is moving in their own body and in other people's bodies or in an environment, a place. And so this can be quite jarring for some people. For instance, if you're brought up to say, well, if you want to know how someone feels, you have to ask them, or they have to tell you in some way, or you have to look at their gestures to get what they're feeling. But all of a sudden, you can even close your eyes, and if someone walks into the room that you don't know, you can get a feeling for who they are. In other words, maybe what thoughts are on their mind, how they feel, maybe what work they do. And some people who are highly empathic or sensitive may even be able to sense if the person is sick or not, and where the illness comes from.
Mm-hmm.
We call that person a medical intuitive. But that involves the sixth sense, having that level of sensitivity. So we're all opening up to one at one pace or another. We're opening up to this notion and this fact that energy is more primary than material reality. Of course, Einstein told us about this over 100 years ago, but we haven't integrated it yet in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it does also mean that people are opening up to other things. For instance, clairaudience. That might mean the ability to sense through the intuition that there are beings of a highly evolved nature that can actually communicate to us and inspire us. And maybe some of our most wonderful music, poetry, books, etc., come from exactly that. Brahms was one person, musician, who actually said, yeah, the music came right to him. It's like he didn't compose it himself. Something was being composed through him.
Mm-hmm.
More and more people are going to be opening to these kinds of experiences, and which sound pretty good, like why not come up with a symphony all of a sudden? But then on the other hand, there can be some very disturbing aspects of it. If someone is open to the voice of spirits, there may be a spirit that's not highly evolved or that isn't particularly well-intentioned, and they can hear or sense the presence of that spirit. So that can be, again, highly disturbing.
Yeah.
And it not only runs up against what we've been trained to think. In other words, it's not scientific or it's not real unless we can measure it with the five senses. So we're confronted with that, but also confronted with, well, what are we perceiving? Is it real? Is it not real? Who makes the decision? Do we make a decision? Does a psychiatrist make a decision? Do our parents make the decision?
Right.
So, and I think, with the dawning of so many people having access to psychedelics and plant medicines these days,
Yeah.
that more people are having experiences of subtle energies in themselves as well as with others, as well as with nature. And so it's opening up their world. But then on the other hand, what do you do when your world opens up in that way?
Right.
And who can you talk to about it? I talked to a number of people in my private consulting practice where they say, I have felt so alone and so isolated for so many years because there was no one who would understand what I'm going through unless it came with the notion that I was probably crazy and needed to see a psychiatrist or needed meds.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of these experiences, I mean, even to go back to that story of the 6-year-old, if the 6-year-old had said, Mommy, Christ is in the room, that mother might have been extremely alarmed, thinking that her child was hallucinating.
Mm-hmm.
And the same can be true for people who are teenagers or young adults or older people or elders.
Yeah.
If they report seeing someone who has passed away,
Yeah.
and they might be considered to be delusional or hallucinating or having a psychotic episode.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to me that, yeah, I think it is difficult for people who do have these extraordinary experiences. I have a friend who has seen extraordinary things, and he's a very grounded, matter of fact, functioning human. There's nothing alarming in his behavior or anything that would indicate that he's mentally imbalanced, but he's had these experiences of seeing other beings, of seeing light orbs, of, Sasquatch and little people and, all these things that, I mean, gosh, if that he just can't openly talk about. It's like, only with certain trusted people that he would share something like that. And it's interesting to me that people, they have these experiences that seem to, they just happen. It's not like they're looking to have this experience. Like the 6-year old isn't like, where's Christ? It's just, no, there he was, or like my friend, yeah, there was a green orb flying on amongst the trees that night, whatever. And so, but we don't, I'm curious if as more of these stories get shared, that we can kind of begin to sort of maybe map out or start to see or map out like what's beyond the realms, which I'm sure that from what I recall, like the Buddhists did, right? They have their maps of consciousness in all the different realms and what exists in all of the realms. I feel like that's nothing new, but we're seeing quote unquote everyday people having these, experiencing these cracks in the veil, and then they're seeing something, and so
Yeah.
yeah, it's just fascinating to me where we're headed. And so I'm curious about when somebody is going through something like this, how and they're, they have this maybe spiritually enlightening experience, and then like you said, there's, oh, now, yeah, I'm having nightmares or this other stuff coming up. What are some of the processes or ways that you work with people to help them maybe integrate that experience? Because I think it's true, like it doesn't, like you said, if somebody goes and has an ayahuasca experience and they're one with the universe and whatever, they see all these things and they come back to their everyday life, it's not really useful to them unless in some way they can take it so that it somehow adds value to their life, or it allows them to contribute to society in a better way. I mean, would you say that that's the case? Like that's really the point of wanting to integrate is these experiences, is to be able then to be a more fully expressed human?
Well, that's a big question. I think there are so many different motivations that people have to, for instance, take an
Mm-hmm.
ayahuasca ritual and take ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are kind of oriented towards it like it's a Walt Disney amusement park.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't have anything else going on this weekend. I think I'll check this out.
Yeah.
You know, and so they may have profound spiritual experiences, a sense of oneness with everything around them in the natural environment. And then they go to work on Monday morning and they say, well, that was interesting. How am I going to complete the day and do what I'm responsible for?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's set aside in the same way that an amusement park situation would be set aside.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are other people who are extremely serious and prepare for the trip with guidance. And by the way, this is what is actually mentioned in those who have really studied this and done research, that it's best, ideal, in other words, to get like 2 or 3 sessions with a psychotherapist or guide who is well trained to prepare for the journey. And part of that is, what is your motivation? What do you want to get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
And if something scary comes up, what's the appropriate way to deal with it? And so a person comes in with a sense of safety, that they know what they want, they know what they're going for. Ideally, the same person who is preparing them is also going to sit with them and be there. And so they already feel some level of connection to the guide. And then afterwards, what's ideal and suggested is they have at least 3 sessions for integrating the experience. So integrating would mean what happened?
Mm-hmm.
What really do you remember that was especially important to you?
Mm-hmm.
And what meaning do you get from it? And is there an indicator there about how you might want to change your life so your life is more satisfying for you? You become a happier person. So that there's a huge difference between, of course, the person who goes for an amusement park experience and the person who goes and because maybe they're motivated because they want to get a view into the larger dimensions of life,
Mm-hmm.
other than what we are, what's considered normal. You get up and get the kids off to school and go to work, and et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different ways. And of course, there's everything in between those 2 particular models of how a person approaches ayahuasca. But I would say that a lot of people don't enter into it because they want to be in service to the greater community. But I would say that almost every single person that I've come in contact with over the last 40 years, who has had a spiritual experience that was deep for them and has gotten sufficient support for it, they have a strong, strong, strong desire to be in service to the greater community. But that's not why they started out. It's just one of the results of a well-integrated spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And I would say another result, which is important for us to note, is that people who do get the support they need around their spiritual awakening experiences generally are much more happy in their life, much more at peace, have much stronger connections with everyone. And we could say, and I say this actually quite frequently, that it leads to human flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, getting the most out of life. And as far as I'm concerned, that's where mental health needs to go, is how can we help people to flourish?
Right.
And that doesn't mean that everyone needs to take ayahuasca the way I just suggested.
Right. No, not at all. Right.
But that spiritual experiences can lead to human flourishing, especially if they are integrated.
Yeah.
And that takes support from other people.
Yeah, the integration piece, because it seems like there can be, well, there's gaps, it's like if you have a spiritual experience, and like you said, well, you still have to go wash the dishes and go to work, and it's like, what do I do with this information? What do I do with this experience? And it can be disorienting when you suddenly are confronted with, perhaps as an example of like, I mean, I'll just say, like, I mean, it seems to me it happens a lot, for example, with people that are in corporate America who go through an awakening and they're just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm done with corporate America. Get me out of here. And they don't know what to do, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, and so, yeah, I can see the tremendous value in having that time to work with somebody that understands and that can be a guide to help integrate. And would you say that part of it is maybe kind of, I guess, just helping them gain clarity around what it means for them? How do they want to move forward with this experience in their life? What are things that need to change, you know? Because, oftentimes, like, from, I know of a few people where, it had to lead to divorce because they woke
Yeah.
up and suddenly realized, like, I'm not with the right person. They're not on the same journey as I am, and that can be very challenging.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and if they don't maybe have the support, they could end up maybe losing the what's been given to them as an opportunity, like you said, to really become more fulfilled in their life.
Mhm.
So it's almost like to me, it's like the analogy of like a caterpillar, right? It's in the cocoon and they awaken, they come out and their wings are still wet, and so they're very vulnerable, right? They're not quite ready to fly yet, but they've had this huge transformative experience. You know, they need a little bit of protection or whatever to, okay, let's dry those wings and get them flapping and, you know, yeah.
Paul Levy is not a psychotherapist, but he's a very bright man who has done a lot of writing. And he refers to caterpillars going into what he calls the goo state. So they're in a space that is quite safe. It's been created for them where they can go through a transformation process where they will emerge, as you were just describing, as a butterfly. And they will have to dry their wings before they're really ready to fly. But at a certain point in their transformation, they are goo, which means no longer a caterpillar and not yet a butterfly and still in a transformation process.
Yeah.
So I think that imagery is very appropriate, especially for people who might have been, in corporate America and just totally dedicated to getting their bank account fat as possible, as fast as possible. And then they have maybe a big experience through, could be ayahuasca. And then they say, whoops, uh-oh, I got to totally change my life. I cannot do what I was doing before. That does not work. It doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's next, which can be extremely difficult for someone who has been, really into their work and maybe quite fulfilled by their work, knowing that they're doing something that's productive and helpful for other people, and they've enjoyed the teamwork, and they're meeting interesting, intelligent folks, and there are all kinds of perks that can go along with a job like that. But if at a certain point there's a much wider view of what life is about,
Mm,
and they start seeing, oh, what I was doing does not match that wider view. I'm not going to be able to live into that wider view if I stay in this smaller space.
yeah.
They enter into goo phase, and it can be, I mean, in the best of all possible worlds, they do have a safe place, and they can have good food and maybe good supportive connections with other people around them while they're going through a real self-reflection process and reevaluation and taking a look at, well, what else can I do? What would work for me?
Yeah. Would you say that, well, it's interesting. I knew about the different yugas, and I wasn't sure if we were still in the Kali Yuga or if we're like moving out of it. So it's good to, it's nice to know that we're 200 years into it. and that it should just, that we should be continue to see an acceleration of evolution and transformation. And so it seems to me that if somebody's having an awakening experience, would you say that in a way it's kind of predestined, because they may not necessarily be looking for it, but it's an inevitability that they go through this experience? To me, it doesn't seem like it's an accident.
Mm.
Like somehow it's part of their soul blueprint for whatever reason. For whatever reason, they are destined to remember who they really are, and to wake up from the programming and the dream, I guess, of what they've been told is supposed to be a good life, and they realize it's something else. So I think it's amazing that you've created this organization. And it's worldwide, correct? Like IMHU, it's a worldwide access for anyone to, yeah.
I did set it up back in 2013 so that it was online for the most part. We have a couple of courses that are on location that people need to fly somewhere or at least get there somehow. And that's been wonderful for the people who were drawn to it. But most of our courses are online. And the other thing that I want to be sure to mention is that for those people who are looking for someone to help them integrate, I have trained 140 spiritual emergence coaches, and they are listed in an international directory of spiritual emergence coaches that's on our website. And the website is imhu.org. So the first four letters of I'm human, imhu.org.
Well,
Yeah. And so on that particular website, we have one tab that's oriented towards individuals who might be really just looking for help and free services.
mhm,
And not everyone in the directory offers free services. Some people do,
mhm.
but within that tab called individuals, there is the link to the directory. So that's an easy way to find it. And then most of the other things in the website are about the courses that we offer. And some of it is really tuned to helping practitioners, as in psychotherapists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, MDs, nurses, learn about how to recognize if someone is in a spiritual awakening process so that it's not confused with psychosis.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there has been no training at all for healthcare providers in this realm of spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis. So they can be very, very well-meaning, wonderful practitioners, but they simply aren't trained to recognize what can go on in this particular process. And they weren't trained with the skills of how to appropriately support someone who's in that process. So IMHU is really dedicated to both assisting people with lived experience and their friends and loved ones, as well as people who are already trained as healthcare providers who recognize there's a gap in their training and they want to fill that gap and be more present for people who are going through this, with the ultimate notion that if someone is fully supported, they can flourish as well as give back to the community, as you were saying.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that what mental health care is all about?
Yeah, it needs to change. It's like, I have a good friend who's a psychiatrist, and really he's like, my job is to give somebody a diagnosis. Like, and that diagnosis sticks with them for the rest of their life. It's in their history records and blah blah blah. And then they believe that that's who they are. And he's come to the conclusion that any sort of mental health issue isn't so much that, oh, there's something wrong with you. There's really something, you're just having a normal human response to a world that we've created that has become, out of balance with who we really are. And so I love that that's how he says it. And so for people that are having this spiritual emergence, yeah, it's like we need to stop just jumping to label people and be like, oh, okay, you're this, you need to take this drug or whatever, and now you just have to learn how to cope with what you have, and it's maybe it'll never go away. And it's like, no, that's not actually true. And again, to your fact, I mean, you were going back to what you said in the beginning, the reality that as we are becoming more aware of subtle energies and our abilities to hold space and, you know, through intention and awareness, that we're so much more than what we've been told, and we can, you know, the body can heal itself. We can assist one another in ways that, like you said, can't really be measured. It can't really be fully explained scientifically. But yeah, so it's super exciting. I really appreciate you taking the time to just share all this really amazing information, clarity, experience. And is there anything else that you would like to leave for the listeners and the viewers of, you know, any last words, I guess, before we sign off?
Okay. I'd just like to say I do have a personal consultation practice. And if anyone wants to get information about it, they just use my name, emmabragdon.com, and we'll get that information. And if they want to understand more about the courses that we offer, both for people with lived experience as well as those who are in a position to coach or counsel other people, then the website is imhu.org. I'm human. First four letters, imhu.org.
Beautiful.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Emma, thank you so much. And to the listeners, please like, share, subscribe. Really share this with anyone that you might know of that could use this kind of support. This might be really a kind of a lifeline for many people. So thank you, Emma. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate
Bye.
it.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.